Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing well. I'm Brian Jones, and I'm a Heartfulness trainer. What does that mean? That means that I teach Heartfulness meditation. I've been doing this for a very long time, almost 50 years. Next year is going to be 50 years for me that I've been doing this practice. That's a pretty long time, I tell you. That's a very long time. So I hope you're all doing well out there. And I just want to switch over to the chat. I know people will start joining here soon. Okay, so if you are out there and you just like to say hello, you like to put a message in the chat and send it, that would be great. Maybe just say your name and where you're from, or anything else you'd like to say. And today, if you want to ask any particular questions, just go ahead and do so. Put those in the chat, and I will be glad to take those up. Vidya, Lakshmi, good morning. Piyush, good morning. Anu, good evening. Yes, good evening for some, morning for me. Karan, how are you? Good to see you. Om Sai Ram. Nice to know you're there. Rachita. All right. Good. People keep joining in. Andy, my brother from Northern Ireland. And he makes sure that I say Northern Ireland, Mahesh from Sacramento, California. Oh, okay, great. So welcome to one and all, and I'm glad you're here. So, each week I take up a topic and I speak from my own, for the most part, I speak just from my own experience. I don't really, quote the books, everything. I mean, sometimes I'll take up some of the books too, but I just like to speak from the heart and speak from my own experience, and share my journey with you, because I think that's what's real. It's and I think especially for today's topic, it really is appropriate because when we talk about, we always refer to our we refer to our spirituality as a journey. Is it really a journey? Well, I don't know, but we start someplace and we seem to wind up someplace. So I think that would qualify as a journey. But today I want to talk about what is the objective. What is the objective of our practice? And I want to keep this at a sort of a very simple level. What is this practice? Why are we doing it? What does it mean to us? Why do we want to do it every day? What is the main objective, and but more importantly, what are the daily benefits and things? What drives us to do this every day? And if you want to chime in with your thoughts about this, please go ahead, add those in the comments as we go on. So when I think of this idea of spiritual journey, when I think of how I started, I had definitely a longing, but I wouldn't even call it a longing. I would say more so that I had a sense that I was missing something. And maybe I could say a sort of lack of fulfillment, and it was what I was missing that was driving me to look for something and find out what it is that was missing from my life. When I was, I started this spirituality business when I was really young, started meditating when I was about 12 years old. I had a profound enlightenment experience when I was 15. And then I faced a lot of difficulties, growing up, just because here in the States, it was sort of on the end of the hippie era, which was, going through the 70s, and it was a wild time. So everyone was generally searching for something. And unfortunately, they were trying to fill that void with the wrong things, generally speaking. But, then we heard, you may have all heard of this, phrase, the age of Aquarius. That was another big term that was thrown around back in those days. And that phrase represented the spiritual journey and sort of a dawning of a new era for human beings here on this planet. And so that was a special time. And, now I think a lot of that has been forgotten or lost. And now we're at a different point in our history where the longing is still there. And I think that's increasing because we're facing a world situation now that's so unsettling. I mean, it's really unsettling. Global warming, we have wars going on. We have so much of prejudice and so much of crime and politics, and everything is so out of balance. We have such a disparity between rich and poor, and there doesn't seem to be any solution in sight. But the one thing that I think everyone is looking for, whether they know it or not, whether they're rich, whether they're poor, whether they, are from different cultures, from different nationalities, everybody's longing for the heart to be fulfilled. That's the best way of saying it. And so they're looking for some way to do that. And heartfulness, this method of meditation, which I practice, and I think all of you out there who are watching are practicing, this is a method that's very unique. It's so different from any other spiritual practice or spiritual path that I come across. And the reason is that it fills the heart. I mean, it literally does. So we actually experience something when we meditate. And by the end of the meditations, especially when we're sitting together as a group, or if you're having an individual sitting with a trainer, by the end of the meditation, you're in a very, very different state of mind and state of heart than we are when we start the meditation. It's dramatic. And, if there's anything that I could say to the people of the world who might be listening, it's that until the heart feels fulfilled, we're always going to be restless. And when we sit down together and just let the mind be still, and in heartfulness, we receive something, in this process. We're receivers. And what are we receiving? We can call it transmission. We can call it love. We can call it grace. We can call it nothingness. We can call it so many different things. But the end result is that we feel filled up. Our heart feels fulfilled, and we feel fulfilled. So when I talk about today, what is the objective of our practice? If we read the books and we read what Babaji says in Maxim 3, we can go to the level of, fix the goal, which should be complete oneness with God. Rest not till the ideal is achieved. But I think, for one, the idea of God is not very popular now. It hasn't been for a long time. Well, most people, they don't want to hear that. In fact, I write on Quora, and anybody who mentions the word God becomes somewhat of an outcast on there, and unfortunately, because people just don't want to hear about that. So, we come up with other words and terminologies like what does that really mean? Well, sometimes we say it means the higher self within us. It means the master within us. These are other ways of looking at it. But I think that for me, the big question in this idea of a goal, if I think about it from a big perspective, what's been coming to me is that, and we never talk about this, well, not that I've heard, okay? I think the question might be, is God a being? Okay. Now, that may seem like a funny sort of a question because, well, for one, if we look at it from a religious perspective, especially from the Christian tradition, people approach God as though God is a being. But in Heartfulness, when we read what Babaji says, he clearly says that God has no mind. So there's no God that's a judging, evaluating God. It's something that can't be grasped with we beings who have a mind. The mind can't grasp that which doesn't have a mind. And so, however, we all know in our own practice when we are at night, if something's troubling us, okay, or if we're trying to correct a tendency in ourselves, when pray, we pray to, the idea of a being, and that being is often in the form of the spiritual guide or spiritual master. So in that respect, we can say, okay, yeah, there is a being. Now, that type of goal is for us at a human level is very useful. It's useful because when we think of the idea of a being, we're relating to the higher self, through what we understand. We are beings. Okay, so this is the advantage of having a spiritual master, is that we have another being that we can relate to, someone that we can talk to, someone that we can hear from them, the teachings that are things we may or may not understand. So when we think about this idea of a goal and what's the objective of our spiritual practice, I think for me, and this surprised me, for me it was to connect with the being who I knew as the master. That was wound up being the objective of my practice. And believe me, for a Westerner growing up from a Christian background, this was a very strange turn of events, really strange, because I was never looking for a master. And, here in the United States, for example, which is, historically been very Christian oriented, this idea of a master is not very popular. But I don't know why, because in Christianity, there's a master, and that master was Jesus. And in Buddhism, there's a master. The master was Gautama, the Buddha. So, so many religions have had spiritual beings who were beings of, extraordinary attainment. And they embodied something that we know when we come in contact with them. Wow, this is something really like I've never experienced before. You feel something. And so the objective of our meditation is to connect with a being. Yeah. And, when we think of this, the heartfulness prayer, the bedtime prayer at night, the last line is, "Thou art the only God and power to bring us up to that stage." Well, when we're saying this prayer at bedtime, we're generally directing that inwards. But most often, I would say we have the idea of the master in mind that we're referring or offering this prayer to. And so it's interesting that this prayer says, "Thou art the only God and power." So, so it does sort of imply that, God is, you know, whatever we call God or know as God is something that is could be a being, and it might not be a being, and it can be probably many different things. But the one thing uh, that gets added here is it says God and power. See, Babaji had said that God has no mind, God has no power. He said God has no power. And the reason would be is that if God had power, God could lose power. Then we're in a give and take situation again, and God is beyond duality. Is God sort of just it's a spontaneous manifester of creation, right? So this puts us in a unique position as far as understanding what the objective of our meditation is. It's to connect with a fellow being who has been able to embody this divine and has the power or capacity to infuse that into us. That's the key. So the role of the spiritual guide or role of the master is one that's extremely important. And I just really want to remind people again that, Jesus was a spiritual master, so we shouldn't necessarily be wary or so afraid of the idea of a spiritual master. Well, we should be wary because there's a lot of false gurus out there. And so we need to be careful. So when we're looking for a guru, there's a few things we should look for. And that is someone who can give us the experience, this divine experience, this awakening type of experience where we get in touch with the divine self within. They should be able to give us that. That's one. And they should be able to give us that experience without asking for a dime, without having any expectations from us, right? And also, we know that Babaji said that the master is actually a servant of humanity. So the master is never trying to get anything from anyone. The master, a real master, is here as a servant to serve. He's the master serving his master. That's number one. And that manifests by helping we human beings. And that's actually the correct way of thinking about it. So now let's go a little more practical. How does this show up, this objective, in our daily life, and what can we do just on a real basic level to feel like that the objective we have is being fulfilled, that our heart is being fulfilled? What is it really that we need to do? And again, from my own experience, I will say that, I spent a long time doing meditation and a lot of time doing heartfulness meditation and doing the cleaning practice too. I wasn't as regular with the cleaning practice as I should have been. It was harder for me to do the cleaning for some reason. But I was, very sincere in my efforts. And eventually it came down to, and this was probably in the early 1990s, I realized that, Babaji had said that if we have constant remembrance for, I think he said 7 or 8 days straight, that it would never leave us. And so I had some time, and I thought to myself, okay, this is a practical objective for my meditation, constant remembrance. And so I made a determination to myself, a determined thought, that I am going to apply all efforts and everything I can think of to be in remembrance until I am in remembrance. Okay. So there were a lot of little things that came to me to help make that happen. And one was that in the morning, I wouldn't get out of bed. When I would wake up and come to my consciousness or awareness, I wouldn't get out of bed until I really rested on my heart and felt that presence, the same presence that I feel in meditation. And I did that every single morning. And probably after about a week and a half, one morning I woke up and wow, that feeling was just right there with me. So in this way, we use the mind to give suggestions to ourselves to evoke something. And when it's evoked, then we don't have to keep doing that over and over again. I mean, there can be a little refresher along the way for sure. So that was one thing. The other thing that I took up was at every meal, I would have the thought, I would make the thought that every particle of the food, every particle was filled with Master's remembrance. Every time I would take a drink of water, a sip of water, which I need right now, actually. Before I would take that sip, I would have the thought, every particle of this water is filled with Master's remembrance. Then in the morning, at the end of my morning meditation, I would make the thought that Master was there present in my workplace before I even got there. And so there were several of these little exercises, I would say. They were suggestions to myself, to my higher self. And one day, this was about maybe, I don't know, so it was more than 7 or 8 days. Maybe I didn't meet that deadline, but maybe 2 weeks or so in. One day I'm at the kitchen sink and I'm doing the dishes or something, and yes, I do the dishes, by the way, and I just realized, oh, wow, I feel Master's presence. I feel that presence with me, and I thought, wow, that's something. And so throughout the day, I would get involved with doing the different things that I need to do. But then, various times of the day, I would just stop and realize, oh, I feel that presence. Presence is with me. Well, to my amazement, it never left. And as time went on, that just deepened and deepened and deepened. And I was, of course, astounded because, I tend to be a scientific thinker, so things need to be proved out for me to believe them. And here, this thing that I had read about, this constant remembrance, which was kind of like a not real, it was kind of a dream to me, turned out to be very real. And when we can evoke the heart's remembrance, that's the key. Because just as a tip, when we say this word remembrance, we think that we have to remember the Master over and over and over and over and over again, consciously. And in the beginning, that's good. Do that too. But what happens is that falls away. You can't hold on to that. And a day comes when you realize that the remembrance is the remembrance of the presence in the heart. And whereas the mind's remembrance is time-based, we're thinking of something, remembering something from our past. The heart's remembrance is infinite. And when you evoke and awaken that remembrance, it just goes on by itself. It's kind of like, the spaceship that you have to apply efforts, to get the satellite out of the Earth's orbit. So it takes a lot of energy at first, or a lot of work to get this thing to lift out of the Earth's atmosphere. But eventually, that first stage with all that power and energy falls off. And now this capsule is just floating and going forever without any resistance through space, traveling at maybe 17,000 miles an hour. So that's the heart's remembrance. And that just keeps going and going and going because there's no resistance to it. It's not time based. And when we put in our initial efforts, that's just to, as Babaji said, we have to convince the divine of our earnestness of purpose. It's so important. It means our sincerity. So, at a very real and practical level, when we think about, what is the objective of our practice? Start with this. Start with this. Complete oneness with God. Okay, that's a big one. Do we know really what that is? We don't really know what that is. So when we take up this idea of remembrance and we apply ourselves to it until we've awakened, evoked that remembrance of the heart, that is a great objective of our practice. And I highly recommend doing that because once you're in remembrance, your progress is going on all the time. And in fact, I'll tell you something funny. I'll tell you something really funny is that years ago, back in 2016, I think it was 2016, Daji came to Ohio and came to the Dayton ashram that we have here. And right after the morning meditation, the very first thing he takes the microphone and the very first thing he says is, "Why are you all still meditating?" That's what he said. Why are you all still meditating? Something to keep in mind. So meditation is not the end goal in itself. It's the tool which we utilize to, evoke that meditative state within us, what we call constant remembrance. Remembrance resting on the self. You can say resting on the big self within, resting on the presence. That is our objective. That is our practical objective. All right. So let's see who else has joined in. Anu, okay. Yes, from India. Kanwal, Mahima, Darshan, Michael, Anusha. Okay, rest of you, welcome to one and all. So I want to invite you all to let's meditate together. Okay, and let's evoke that presence within. And also, after the meditation, try and stay with that presence. Let me say this: let it stay with you. Let it stay with you. It's not so hard. Okay. So please sit comfortably. Let's start by taking a slow, deep breath in. And let it go. Feel your shoulders are relaxing. Let your shoulders drop down. Now relax your arms, your palms and fingers. That's all. Feel your body relaxed. And just rest on that meditative state. Let's have the thought that everyone in the world is also experiencing this state of deep peace. Okay, whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes. All right. All right, everyone. So let's see. So to Azilda, Ravi Kumar, can't see all the names right here on my screen, but to all of you, thank you so much for taking the time to come together and meditate together. That's something that we do for ourselves and we share with everyone else as well. So I look forward to seeing you next week. And until then, all the best. And as I always say, stay with the heart.